remembering why any of that stuff. I'm happy where I am, and I can do it a lot cheaper.
Why are you thinking about buying a new computer at all?
Because you're trying to sell it to me, that's all.
If you're happy with what you got, I'm not trying to sell you anything you don't need. The question is, what are you going to be doing with that computer? For 15 years, we haven't had anything to talk about philosophically. We haven't, within the IBM Corporation, given our customers the opportunity to use that computer as a competitive weapon. The introduction of virtual storage changed the environment enough that new kinds of programming became possible. But for 15 years after that, nothing happened. Now we've recovered a competitive advantage. And it's that competitive advantage that's provided with ESA that I want to try to convince you to use it. If the customer doesn't need it, don't sell it to them. If the customer has an application that's constrained, ESA can solve it. If the customer spends resource doing tuning, ESA can reduce that resource cost. If the customer's paging, you can use ESA to simplify even that part of the configuration. Many of the things people have taken for granted are now choices. They're not axioms of the way you do programming. And I'd be happy to spend more time on that at another presentation. Are there any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned competitive edge. ESA provides you with competitive edge. After you leave here, you're going to go to my competitor and tell him the same thing.
Absolutely.
So I've lost my competitive edge because he's going to install it as well.
Using ESA is a two-step
That's time.
process.
Rephrase the answer and tie it back.
Yes.
Give yourself some living time up there.
But I've dealt with that question a few times, but it's a good one.
All the others were lousy
Let me tell
then,
you
right?
this one.
Let's see if you do it right this time, Bill.
The question is, if I identify a competitive edge for company A, isn't company B going to be able to realize the same thing? Theoretically, yes. The question is one of culture. Company A may never have defined their computer as a competitive weapon in the same way company B does. Using this set of off-the-shelf software for the dozens and dozens of ways to reduce I/O is something anybody can do. We can all buy vSIM buffers in hyperspace. We can all use the reduction for program fetch I/O. But your best people, your technical people, may have in mind something that none of the other folks' technical people ever had. That's the thing that they, the individual customer, only can embody in an ESA architecture. When I speak to groups of customers, what I tell them is if you've got a function, let IBM know about it. The more we and IBM know about how they're using the computer, the more effectively we can bring the resources of the corporation to bear on that solution. But if they get a really good one, tell nobody. Make it a secret. Set up project. It's like selling vectors to the folks at Merrill Lynch. We gave them the presentation, we gave them the manual, said, are there any questions? And they said, would the IBMers please leave the room? Because they had one in mind, and there was no way they wanted even the IBM Corporation to know what that specific solution was. So, identify opportunities. Get the people who are dreaming dreams. Bring back the folks who are spending their time thinking about AIX or wondering what I'll do with LANs. Reintroduce them to the competitive value of the 370 solution, the mainframe enterprise. Don't let them get lost in history. Don't let them view that 370 investment as a cash cow. It's a competitive weapon again if we can identify it. Any other questions? Use some of the ideas that Ken has shared with us over the last 2 days on product announcements and to put them into a context and a framework so that when we do future announcements, we can benefit from that learning. Now, I'm a programmer. That's my profession. I've done it for 10 years. Are there any other programmers here? Hi, my name's Bill. I'm a programmer. No? Okay.
What do you mean, no? I raised my hand.
One program. Rex is close. Actually, any language, not just applications, systems, but even for your personal computer. I think even using a Lotus spreadsheet counts. There's a discipline to doing programming. There's a way in which you have to organize your thoughts to write a program well. I'm going to try to use that discipline in order to build a framework around what we've done with our announce process. The discipline says if you've got a programming problem, you try to define the main issue that you're going to solve. And then you take that main issue and you say, well, what do I need to get it done? How am I going to use that information? And then what does my end product look like? So you make a high-level statement of the problem, then define your inputs, process, and the outputs. That's how it works for programming. Now, when we're working with people, there's another thing, in that each one of us, unlike a computer, brings a different skill to bear. And so I want to not only discuss the goal the inputs and the process and the output, but talk about the skill set that you use to build a product announcement. So what I've done is I've developed a chart, and what I'd like your input on is to complete this chart. Now there's going to be a big gap, which I'll point out as we get into it. Enterprise system announcements have as their goal generally letting a customer know about a product, but it's not just education. Okay? It's not an educational section. It's letting the customer know about a product and leaving them motivated to want to buy it. So there's two things. If it were just education, we'd build the materials in one way. If it were simply generating enthusiasm, we'd hire Robert Preston or whoever succeeded his mantle to come in and excite folks. We need to do both. We need to talk about the product in a way that leaves the customer wanting to buy the product. So that's our goal, and I've highlighted what I think some of the inputs ought to be. Clearly there's more words that need to be behind this. Product function means not just what does it do, but what does it do in terms of the customer understands. Come out with a product announcement. We're announcing today MVS SP313. I've just announced a code name. Nobody knows what that means. Nobody could possibly know what MVS 313 means. Second step, taking it more towards the customer. I'm announcing a new release of MVS. Well, I know there's an operating system called MVS, but it begs the question, what does it do? So the third step, what we actually did this time, I'm announcing hyper-batch, high-performance batch processing using the functions in the operating system. This time was the first time we tried to state the contents of the announcement in customer terms. Now, in addition to talking about what the product does, we need to talk about how customers are going to use it. So that's the requirement the customer had for that function. Sometimes we get in the embarrassing situation of announcing a product and having trouble figuring out what a customer would do with it. I recall a lab director's comment. Can anybody in the room tell me why we did this function? It's an embarrassing thing to ask at the end of a product development cycle, and it's especially embarrassing when none of the developers or managers in the room can answer that question. In other words, we have to keep our eye on the ball. What is the customer going to want to know? What are they going to want to do with it? And one element that I think we tend to either subsume in this or lose sight of completely is, what does the customer know now? How do we describe it? Not only in terms of what we know the product means internally, but how's the customer going to use it? The skills I think we need to bring to bear to support these are, the marketing folks have to tell us not only what the customers need, but also what the customers know. What problems does the customer see? Not what problems do we see. It's one thing if we have a problem with the price of a product. It's another thing if we have a product whose function cannot be explained in simple and clear terms to the marketplace. So I want marketing people building this deliverable who know what customers are doing today and how they're doing it and what they know. I want people from the lab to tell me what the product is and what it does, but I don't want them to tell me about lines of code. I don't want to give me alphabet soup. I don't want them to describe new algorithms. I want to know what it does in terms that the customer can use. And that's a skill that our laboratories are weak on, but getting better. I think San Jose did a nice job with systems managed storage. They went out to customers and said, tell me, what do you need out of these access methods? What do you spend your time on? Where do you waste money on? Where do you have to invest resources to solve problems that are really essential to IBMs? And finally, in headquarters, it took me a while to figure this out. What do we add? What value do we add? Why are we here? When it comes to an announcement, what do we do? Any ideas?
That what you got in the thing? Coordination of those two different things, how they mesh.
But coordination is clerical. Coordination is not a high-priced value-add activity, isn't it?
It depends.
It depends. What does it depend on? What does our coordinating skill depend on?
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
You're bridging
knowledge
those.
of it.
You're bridging those.
Bridging from what to what?
The marketing, the lab, trying to get masses of people at all different levels together and what the thing is.
And
It
the
seems-
communication skills that these people transmit in. The lab talks in certain language, the marketing talks in certain language. You bring them both together.
So one of the skills that we require in the headquarters staff is the ability to talk to marketing people and the ability to talk to lab people in their own language.
Right.
How well did we do on that, George? What do you think?
Depends on who you're talking to.
Right. It's extremely dependent on having the right person. That's a vulnerability, right, Dave?
Absolutely.
I mean, if one of the criticisms of the nuclear power industry is that it's built by geniuses to be implemented by geniuses. One of the successes of the U.S. Army is it's designed by geniuses to be staffed by ordinary folks. I think there's a vulnerability in our announce process that it's designed by geniuses and only geniuses like us can do that work. And I think that's a risk that the company runs perpetually. Too many key people. What about the strategy? Is that just headquarters value add, self-generated? Do we really infuse strategies into our marketing messages?
Strategy is what sells. That's not always what we have called a strategy.
What strategies have you seen effectively communicated in announced deliverables?
Growth.
Growth, customer growth is a strategy we communicate effectively. Are there any others?
Reduce the cost of ownership.
Reduce cost of ownership. That means investment protection,
That's one of the
or
ways.
that means returning a sort of a soft annuity to the customer. But is that a strategy that's focused on a customer requirement? See, what I'm trying to do, and I don't mean to put you gentlemen on the spot, is I believe there's a weakness in that we don't really know what strategies are. Maybe it's because we're too close to them. What I'd ask you to do is to think in terms of this model, what skills we bring to the table. We know what the lab does, they build stuff. And we know what the marketing folks do, they sell stuff. We've got a peddler, and we've got a customer, and we should wrap our business around that. That conversation is what all of this is about. This model is an attempt, a programmer's attempt, to structure that process. And here is what I think Ken has been focusing on. Think about how we might use this model to articulate and improve the process by which we improve deliverables. I'd like to talk with each of you as we go through our next announcements and see how we might be able to enhance and add more detail to this. Yes?
Can you explain what means IPO?
Input, process, output.
What was the question?
What the question was, what's the model here on the chart? And I'm sorry I didn't exemplify that initially. This is the programmer's thing. You say, here's the goal, here are the inputs I need, here's the process I follow, and here's the outputs. And right at the moment, I concur with Mr. Knapp that the process is not a process, it's a happening, it's an event. It's a festival where we gather hundreds of people and in a short time frame produce thousands of things. It is not a structured, quality, defined, organized series of events. Yes?
Maybe I'm not understanding what Ken's focused on, but Ken seemed to focus on improving the productivity and quality of taking the inputs and producing the outputs. What you seem to be talking about more is deciding what those outputs should be and then improve that process to get to. Are you saying that the outputs we're producing are the right ones?
This is going to be good.
Okay, I will. Bye. That's Jim Hill. Okay, I don't think I remember your question.
Allow me to rephrase.
I didn't
Oh,
think of
gee.
using him to call it.
That's impressive. I've heard about dancing around questions. This is amazing. What I'm hearing from you is that you're focused on the strategy and what the output should be as opposed to process. Is that right?
Well, I guess I'm not communicating the message. If what you're
Can
hearing
I
is that
rephrase,
folks-
answer, and
Yeah,
add it back?
I was going to try to
Okay.
shape that. If what your question is that we need to emphasize, am I asking for more emphasis here? No, that's not exactly what I'm looking for. What I'm trying to do is to build a framework for the ideas. What I'd like you to do is to consider how do you solve a problem. when somebody gives you a task, how do you organize your resources? How do you build the case for using those other people? This is a programmer's framework for solving ideas. Now, certainly, there are more things that need to be listed here. This isn't the only outputs, but I'd like to open the discussion as to what those might be. Yes?
Let me phrase it a little bit to the point. What I hear from the labs is they say, tell me the requirements from the customer, and then I build something that fulfills the requirements, and the field, the marketing force tells me, give me something that sells itself. And I have a problem to see a process, a formalized process, that works on that. Because if there is I learn something new from the requirement from the customer, I cannot close a design, I have to find a way to accommodate it.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
If you take the programming process, input, process, output, it means the input is defined at a certain time, and then it's processed. And then, if you need to change something at the input, you run the process again. And that does
not
not work.
following what your question is.
Well, you are making here the point that we should define, we need a process to do this. I do not believe that a process is the answer to that problem.
I don't think I understand what you're trying to tell me. I do not mean to discuss the development of a product here. This is trying to put a context around the announcement process itself. There are a number of things that happen when you build a set of announcement materials. You gather a number of people with different skills, you marshal some information, and then you construct some deliverables. The purpose of this model is simply to lay out that activity in a slightly different fashion so that you can apply a certain amount of intellectual discipline. The next step in a programming solution would be to refine each one of these activities again into what do I need to develop the statement of the product function? How do I do so, and what does the statement of a product function look like? So this is actually the top step of an iterative process from the point of view of programming.
Now, Bill, tell us what are the results desired from this, and just
What I
wrap
would
it up
like-
for us.
What I would like each of you to do is, as we go into our next announcement cycle, as we begin producing our next set of deliverables, consider how you would shape what people you'd want, what things you actually need in as fine terms as you can, and what deliverables you're aiming at the beginning of the process. We took it for given that we would be producing a list of 35 deliverables when we kicked off in June, what we ended up announcing in October. There was not a lot of discussion as to which ones were right. The only criteria was what do we have time to do. I think that leads to an inadequate and substandard set of announced deliverables. I'd be happy to discuss this with each of you offline later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now, how did Bill do with that talk? What do you think? Tommy?
Bill, you had great eye contact. You described the problem, but again you fell in the trap of IPO. You did not describe what it meant. It's part of your case methods. But if you said input instead of I, process or P, that would have made it much clearer and we avoided lots of discussion later on.
Right. I did say it, but I didn't have the chart up when I said it, and I should have spelled it out.
Well, I like saying, leave it behind, make the chart less busy.
Yeah, that was the other trade-off. If I put too many more words on this, it turns into a page of text.
Okay.
You made one change between the one-on-one and the group. In the one-on-one, you asked at the beginning, how many of you had ever coded a program? In this, you asked how many people were programmers.
Right.
Yes.
You got very few people saying you were programmers. The other question that you said you're going to do, you get everybody.
You're
You
right.
lost some of them.
You're right, yeah.
And I also had the feeling that the central message was stated a little more clearly up front. It tended to be just a kind of an introduction and then, here's the information, And it kind of took a while, I think, to get to the central message. But boy, if it's right up front, I think the rest tracks much easier. Okay, anything else, Mark?
Well, I think my last question, he reacted quite well. First, I had the feeling he's just trying to pull me off, but then I think he really went into it and explained it.
Mhm.
So I think that was well handled.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
The way you took your hand off your pocket very quickly, you got that.
Bolster Bill.
All right, well, get your tape. Nicely done. Who's going to be next? Jeff?